magic mushrooms. Born in darkness, feared by empires, worshipped by civilizations, and rediscovered by a world desperate to understand its own mind. From the moment the first ancient spore pushed through the forest floor, this molecule has waited, not to be found, but to be awakened. This is the colossal, centuries-spanning saga of a fungus that became a sacrament, a threat, a crime, a cure, and a revolution. Journey from hidden mountain ceremonies to colonial suppression, from counterculture explosions to secret basement grows, from outlawed rituals to cutting-edge medical breakthroughs redefining the future of mental health. Across continents, across eras, across the boundaries of consciousness itself, one molecule threads through human history with unstoppable force. A story of science, a story of spirit, a story of everything we fear and everything we hope for. The ancient spore has returned, and the world is finally listening. This is the complete science of magic mushrooms. Before we begin, if you enjoy these types of interesting science topics, hit the like button, comment, and tell us where you are listening from. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you know what to do. Simply subscribe. Before cities rose from grasslands, before agriculture reshaped continents, before the first written word preserved human thought, there were mushrooms pushing through leaf litter in dark forests, their caps glistening with morning dew, their flesh containing a molecule that would bridge worlds. Psilocybin mushrooms belong to multiple genera, scattered across the planet's temperate and tropical zones. They emerge from rich soil and meadows across Europe, from cow pastures in the American South, from highland cloud forests in Oaxaca, from the wet grasslands of Thailand and Australia. These are not rare specimens hidden in remote corners. They are cosmopolitan, adaptable, ancient. The genus Psilocybe alone contains over 200 species, and other genera, Panaeolus, Gymnopilus, Conocybe, also produce the molecule that alters human consciousness. The mushroom itself is merely the fruiting body, the temporary reproductive structure of a vast organism living beneath the surface. Below ground, beyond sight, thread-like filaments called mycelium spread through soil and rotting wood, forming networks that can span acres. These fungal highways digest dead matter, recycling nutrients, communicating through chemical signals. The mushroom appears only when conditions align: proper temperature, sufficient moisture, the right substrate. It emerges to scatter spores, then withers, returning its matter to the earth. But why does this organism produce psilocybin at all? Evolution offers no simple answers, but hypotheses exist. The molecule may deter certain insects from feeding on fungal tissue. It may alter the behavior of animals in ways that promote spore dispersal. It may serve functions invisible to human observation, playing roles in fungal ecology still being decoded. What is certain is this: long before humans discovered its properties, psilocybin existed as a chemical strategy in the broader evolutionary game. Humans, however, have been aware of these mushrooms for thousands of years. Rock art in Saharan caves depicts mushroom forms dating back 7,000 years or more. Stone sculptures in Guatemala and El Salvador show figures with mushroom imagery, artifacts from cultures that vanished before European contact. In the highlands of central Mexico, the Mazatec, Mixtec, and Zapotec peoples maintained ceremonial relationships with specific mushroom species, relationships embedded in cosmology and healing practice. The Spanish chroniclers who arrived in the 16th century documented indigenous use with a mixture of fascination and horror. They wrote of ceremonies conducted at night, of mushrooms consumed in darkness, of visions that guided decisions and healed afflictions. The colonizers called them flesh of the gods in translation, recognizing that these were not recreational substances but sacraments woven into spiritual life. The Catholic Church, viewing such practices as diabolical, suppressed the ceremonies. The knowledge went underground, preserved in remote villages where traditional ways persisted beyond colonial sight. For centuries, the mushrooms remained outside Western scientific awareness. European botanists classified fungi, mapped distributions, studied spore structures, but the consciousness-altering species of the Americas stayed largely unknown to formal science. A few scattered reports surfaced travelers' tales, anthropological footnotes, but no systematic investigation occurred. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, that changed. Mycologists and ethnobotanists, drawn by rumors of ceremonial mushroom use still practiced in southern Mexico, made expeditions into Oaxacan mountains. They participated in veladas, all-night healing ceremonies led by curanderas who sang prayers and divined answers while under the mushroom's influence. These experiences were documented, photographed, recorded, and eventually published in mainstream American magazines. The revelations electrified certain communities. Here was a naturally occurring substance, used for millennia, that profoundly altered perception and seemed to offer access to dimensions of consciousness previously reserved for mystics and poets. The molecule became symbolic, a chemical key to doors normally locked. But this moment of discovery marked a rupture. What had been sacred and carefully contextualized became commodified and sensationalized. Seekers arrived in Mazatec villages by the hundreds, disrupting communities and trivializing ceremonies. The mushroom, removed from its cultural matrix, became another psychedelic substance in an expanding pharmacopoeia of consciousness exploration. At the same time, chemists isolated the active compound. They determined its structure, synthesized it in laboratories, explored its pharmacology. The molecule that had evolved in fungal tissue millions of years ago, that had guided indigenous ceremonies for thousands of years, now existed as a pure substance in glass vials, subject to Western scientific scrutiny. This origin story spanning evolutionary time, indigenous knowledge, colonial suppression, and modern rediscovery sets the stage for everything that follows. The mushroom is a biological organism with ecological roles and evolutionary pressures. The molecule within it is a chemical compound with specific actions on mammalian neurology. The human relationship with both is layered with history, spirituality, exploitation, healing, and transformation. The journey begins here, in damp soil and ancient tradition, at the intersection of nature and human need. The mushroom does not exist until it does. For weeks or months, the organism lives as mycelium, an underground network barely visible even if the soil were peeled back and examined closely. These threads, each thinner than a human hair, extend through substrate, secreting enzymes that break down organic matter, absorbing nutrients, expanding silently. Then environmental signals converge. Temperature drops with autumn rains, moisture saturates the substrate, oxygen levels shift. These triggers activate genetic programs dormant during vegetative growth. The mycelium consolidates resources, pooling energy into specific locations. Small nodules form, then swell, then push upward through soil and leaf litter. Within days, the fruiting body completes its transformation. A stalk extends, a cap unfurls, gills or pores develop beneath the cap where spores will form. The mushroom stands exposed to air, vulnerable to predators and weather, existing only long enough to release millions of spores into wind and rain. Most spores will perish, landing in inhospitable locations. A tiny fraction will germinate, forming new mycelial networks, continuing the cycle. For those who seek these mushrooms, timing and knowledge are essential. Traditional harvesters in Oaxaca know which hillsides yield which species, which moon phases correspond to fruiting, which weather patterns precede emergence. This is knowledge accumulated over generations, passed through apprenticeship and ceremony. The harvest is not casual. Mushrooms are gathered with prayers, with intention, with respect for the life being taken. In other contexts, the harvest is opportunistic. After summer storms, when conditions align in pastures across the American South or Pacific Northwest, small groups venture out at dawn. They scan grass for the distinctive caramel-colored caps of certain species, for the blue bruising stems that indicate the presence of psilocybin. Identification requires care. Many mushrooms appear similar. Some are benign, some are deadly. Field guides help, but mistakes occur, sometimes with fatal consequences. The mushrooms are delicate, handled roughly. They bruise and begin decomposing within hours. Harvesters place them gently in woven baskets or paper bags, avoiding plastic that traps moisture and accelerates decay. Back home, they are spread on screens or paper, allowed to dry in moving air. Drying halts decomposition and concentrates the active compounds, making long-term storage possible. But by the late 20th century, a different method emerged: cultivation. Rather than waiting for seasonal fruiting in uncertain wild locations, individuals learned to create ideal conditions indoors. The principles are straightforward, even if execution requires patience and precision. Cultivation begins with spores, collected from mature mushrooms or purchased through networks that navigate legal gray zones. Spores are introduced to sterilized substrate, often grain, which provides carbohydrates and nutrients mycelium requires. Sterility is critical. Competing organisms, bacteria, molds, will colonize substrate faster than mushroom mycelium, ruining the effort. Under controlled temperature and humidity, spores germinate and mycelium spreads through grain, turning it white with fungal growth. This colonized grain is then transferred to larger containers with richer substrate. Mixtures of coconut fiber, vermiculite, manure, each recipe tailored to specific species. The mycelium colonizes this secondary substrate. Then, when conditions trigger fruiting, mushrooms emerge in flushes. Home cultivation removes the uncertainties of wild harvesting. It eliminates identification risks. It allows year-round production independent of weather. It also eliminates the need for trade networks or exposure to legal scrutiny when purchasing. The mushrooms grown in spare closets and basements are genetically identical to those found in mountain forests, containing the same molecule in similar concentrations. Yet something shifts in this transition. The mushroom, once embedded in ecology, part of nutrient cycles, relationships with trees and grasses, seasonal rhythms, becomes a product optimized for yield. The context collapses. What required ancestral knowledge or ecological intimacy now requires only equipment and instructions downloaded from corners of the internet. This democratization has consequences. Access expands dramatically. Individuals in regions where mushrooms do not naturally grow can cultivate their own supply. Legal risks diminish when nothing is bought or sold, when production remains private. At the same time, the ceremonial framework that once contained the experience dissolves. The mushroom becomes detached from lineage, from elder guidance, from cultural meaning. Indigenous communities watch this appropriation with complex emotions. On one hand, the mushroom's spread might reduce demand for exploitation of their lands and traditions. On the other, the sacred is rendered mundane, commodified, stripped of context. The molecule remains the same, but its meaning transforms completely. Whether harvested from rain-soaked pastures or cultivated in climate-controlled chambers, the mushroom arrives in human hands as organic matter, unremarkable in appearance, extraordinary in effect. The journey from spore to fruiting body is complete. The next transformation occurs not in soil or substrate, but in the biochemical machinery of the human body. The mushroom, as it exists in nature, is not the molecule that alters consciousness. Psilocybin, the compound responsible for the mushroom's effects, is a prodrug, a precursor requiring transformation before becoming psychoactive. This transformation happens not in laboratories or extraction processes, but inside the human digestive system. When fresh or dried mushroom tissue is consumed, chewing breaks down cell walls, releasing psilocybin into saliva and stomach acid. The compound itself is relatively stable, surviving the acidic environment of the stomach. It passes into the small intestine, where it encounters enzymes that cleave away a portion of its molecular structure. This enzymatic action removes a phosphate group, converting psilocybin into psilocin. Psilocin is the true active agent, the molecule that crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds to receptors in neural tissue. The body performs this conversion efficiently, usually within minutes of ingestion. Why does the mushroom produce psilocybin rather than directly synthesizing psilocin? The answer lies in stability and function. Psilocybin is more stable in mushroom tissue, less prone to degradation by air and light. Psilocin, more chemically fragile, would degrade faster if stored in fungal cells. By producing the phosphorylated form, the mushroom ensures the compound remains potent through the organism's life cycle. The concentration of psilocybin varies dramatically between species and even between individual mushrooms of the same species. Environmental factors, substrate composition, moisture levels, maturity at harvest all influence potency. Some species contain less than 1% psilocybin by dry weight. Others exceed 2%. This variability creates unpredictability for those consuming whole mushrooms, where dose cannot be precisely controlled. Drying concentrates these compounds by removing water, which comprises roughly 90% of fresh mushroom weight. A person might consume 30 grams of fresh mushrooms or 3 grams of dried material to receive equivalent amounts of psilocybin. Drying also stabilizes the material, preventing bacterial and fungal decomposition that would otherwise occur within days. Beyond simple drying, other preparations exist. Some traditions brew mushrooms into tea, steeping dried or fresh material in hot water. The heat extracts psilocybin into liquid, allowing consumption without eating fibrous fungal tissue. This reduces nausea, a common side effect related to chitin in mushroom cell walls. The tea is consumed quickly, sometimes with honey or lemon juice. Substances some believe enhance absorption or conversion to psilocin. Modern contexts have introduced other forms. Ground-dried mushrooms are encapsulated, allowing precise measurement and avoiding taste. Chocolates infused with mushroom powder mask flavor while providing stable dosing. These preparations do not alter the chemistry. Psilocybin remains psilocybin, but they change the experience of consumption and the predictability of dose. At a conceptual level, extraction could concentrate psilocybin into purer forms, removing plant matter entirely. Such processes involve dissolving compounds in solvents, filtering, evaporating, and isolating the desired molecules. However, describing these methods in actionable detail crosses ethical lines. What matters is understanding that the transition from whole mushroom to concentrated compound is technically feasible, though rarely pursued outside pharmaceutical contexts. The environmental impact of mushroom production is minimal compared to many agricultural endeavors. Cultivation requires no pesticides, no heavy machinery, no irrigation infrastructure. Wild mushrooms grow in ecological niches already present, requiring no human intervention beyond harvesting. The carbon footprint is negligible. The waste generated is biodegradable organic matter. This stands in contrast to synthetic production of psilocybin in pharmaceutical laboratories, which requires chemical precursors, energy-intensive processes, and generates chemical waste. Natural production through fungal biology remains the most ecologically sound method, even as pharmaceutical interest grows. Precursor chemicals for synthetic production exist in global markets, but their trade is monitored and restricted. Pharmaceutical companies navigate regulatory frameworks to obtain materials for research. Illicit synthesis remains rare because natural cultivation is simpler, cheaper, and produces a product indistinguishable in effect from laboratory-made psilocybin. The transformation that truly matters, then, is not human-directed but biological. The mushroom synthesizes psilocybin through enzymatic pathways encoded in its genome. The human body converts psilocybin to psilocin through its own enzymes. The molecule's journey from fungal tissue to human neuron is mediated by biological systems optimized over evolutionary time. This transformation is elegant, efficient, and universal. Whether the mushroom grew in a Oaxacan forest or a bedroom closet in Berlin, whether consumed fresh in ceremony or dried in chocolate at a music festival, the chemistry remains constant. Psilocybin becomes psilocin. Psilocin reaches the brain. Consciousness shifts. The next chapter of the journey is geographic and political. How mushrooms and their derivatives move across borders, through markets, legal and illegal, into the hands of millions. The mushroom's journey into global consciousness begins with a magazine article. In the late 1950s, a photojournalist and amateur mycologist published an account of his experiences in southern Mexico, describing ceremonies conducted by a Mazatec curandera. The article appeared in a mainstream American magazine with massive circulation, introducing millions of readers to the concept of mushrooms that alter consciousness. The impact was immediate. Within months, seekers began arriving in the Sierra Mazateca, asking villagers for mushrooms, seeking curanderas willing to guide foreigners through ceremonies. What had been private, sacred, and carefully guarded became public spectacle. The curandera, who had welcomed the original visitors, found herself besieged by outsiders who disrespected protocols, treated ceremonies as entertainment, and brought unwanted attention from authorities. She eventually denounced the visitors, saying they had profaned sacred traditions. But the door, once opened, could not be closed. The mushroom had entered Western consciousness, and demand would only grow. Simultaneously, chemists began synthesizing psilocybin in laboratories. By the early 1960s, pharmaceutical companies were producing the compound for psychiatric research. Therapists administered pure psilocybin in clinical settings, exploring its potential for treating alcoholism, depression, and anxiety in terminal patients. Early results were promising, suggesting therapeutic applications warranting further study. Then the broader cultural moment shifted. Psychedelic substances became associated with countercultural movements, anti-war protests, and challenges to authority. Governments responded with prohibition. In the United States, psilocybin was classified as a controlled substance with no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. Similar prohibitions spread across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Research halted almost overnight. Legal access vanished, but demand did not. The same counterculture that alarmed authorities embraced psilocybin as a tool for exploration and consciousness expansion. Mushrooms, unlike synthesized drugs requiring chemical expertise, could be grown by anyone with basic mycological knowledge. The organism itself became the distribution network, bypassed entirely the need for smuggling or manufacturing infrastructure. Information spread through underground publications, word of mouth, and later through early internet forums. Cultivation techniques refined over decades of trial and error became accessible to anyone willing to learn. By the 1980s and 90s, home cultivation was widespread in North America and Europe. Mushrooms did not need to move across borders because they could be grown almost anywhere. Wild harvesting also continued. In regions where psilocybin species grew naturally, seasonal gathering became a low-level economic activity. in the Pacific Northwest. For example, certain species fruit abundantly in autumn. Small-scale pickers collect mushrooms by the pound, drying and selling them through informal networks. The risk is relatively low compared to trafficking other substances. Penalties, where enforced, tend to be less severe. Detection is difficult when the product looks like dried organic matter. Trade networks, such as they exist, are decentralized and small-scale. Unlike cocaine or heroin, which require specific geographic sources and complex smuggling routes, mushrooms are produced locally and consumed locally. There are no cartels controlling production, no shipping containers moving product across oceans, no violent turf wars over distribution territory. The internet transformed this landscape further. Online marketplaces, operating in legal gray zones or outright illegality, connected buyers and sellers globally. Spore prints and syringes containing spores legal in many jurisdictions because they contain no psilocybin could be mailed internationally. Cultivation supplies, ordered from hydroponics retailers, aroused no suspicion. The infrastructure for small-scale production was entirely legal until the moment spores germinated. Darknet markets, accessible through encrypted browsers, facilitated direct trade in dried mushrooms. Sellers shipped small quantities in vacuum-sealed packages disguised as other goods. Buyers used cryptocurrency for anonymity. Law enforcement struggled to interdict these diffuse, low-volume transactions. Compared to the vast trade in opioids or stimulants, mushrooms represented a minor concern. This decentralized model meant that psilocybin mushrooms, though illegal nearly everywhere, remained persistently available. No single law enforcement operation could disrupt supply because there was no centralized supply chain. The mushroom's biology itself was the source, reproducible anywhere with minimal resources. By the 21st century, a new shift began. Scientific interest in psilocybin resurged. Researchers, navigating complex regulatory requirements, obtained permissions to study the compound's therapeutic potential. Clinical trials at prestigious universities investigated psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, end-of-life anxiety, addiction, and cluster headaches. Results were striking, with some patients experiencing profound and lasting improvements after just 1 or 2 sessions. This research catalyzed public opinion shifts. Jurisdictions began reconsidering prohibition. Some American cities decriminalized possession and cultivation, making enforcement the lowest police priority. Oregon voters approved a ballot measure, creating a legal framework for supervised psilocybin therapy. Other regions explored similar models. Simultaneously, pharmaceutical companies recognized commercial potential. If psilocybin could be patented in novel formulations or delivery methods, if therapy protocols could be standardized and monetized, substantial profits might follow. Investment capital flowed into psychedelic biotech startups. The mushroom, once a sacrament and then a prohibited substance, was being reframed as medicine. This trajectory from indigenous ceremony to countercultural icon to prohibited substance to emerging medicine traces economic, political, and cultural forces far larger than the molecule itself. The mushroom has not changed. Human societies have changed around it, projecting meanings, enforcing prohibitions, seeking profits, rediscovering ancient knowledge. The routes are not geographic but conceptual, moving through legal categories, cultural contexts, and economic models. The mushroom arrives in contemporary hands, carrying this entire history, a molecule embedded in narratives of colonization, prohibition, liberation, and commodification. In the hands of a consumer, the mushroom has completed its journey from mycelial network to dried organic matter, often stored in glass jars or plastic bags, protected from light and moisture. What arrives is deceptively simple: stems and caps, brittle from drying, ranging in color from pale tan to dark brown, sometimes exhibiting blue bruising where cell walls ruptured during handling. Appearance varies by species. Some have delicate, slender stems and small caps. Others are robust, thick-stemmed, with caps several inches across. Experienced users learn to recognize specific species, though visual identification of dried material is imprecise. What matters most is not appearance but potency, and potency is invisible. This variability creates challenges. A dose that produces mild effects with one batch might overwhelm with another. Traditional contexts manage this through experience and ceremonial structure. Contemporary recreational use often lacks such frameworks. Users estimate doses based on weight, but weight correlates imperfectly with psilocybin content. A cautious person might consume 1 gram of dried mushrooms. A more experienced user might take 3 or 4 grams. Heroic doses, sought by those pursuing maximum intensity, can exceed 5 grams. But not all mushrooms reach consumers as whole dried specimens. Ground into powder, mushrooms become easier to measure and consume. The powder, dark brown and fibrous, is often encapsulated in gelatin or vegetable-based capsules. This allows precise dosing and avoids the bitter, earthy taste many find unpleasant. Capsules are discreet, portable, and unremarkable in appearance. Mushroom-infused chocolates have become increasingly common, particularly in regions where decriminalization has emboldened producers. The mushroom powder is blended into melted chocolate, poured into molds, and allowed to solidify. The chocolate masks flavor, provides stable storage, and can be divided into measured doses. These products circulate through informal markets, branded and packaged with varying degrees of professionalism. Tea remains a traditional preparation. Dried mushrooms are steeped in hot water, sometimes with added ginger to combat nausea or lemon juice for flavor. The liquid is consumed while warm, often resulting in faster onset than eating solid mushrooms. Solid material is usually discarded, though some consume it to ensure no active compounds are wasted. Microdosing, a practice gaining attention in recent years, involves consuming sub-perceptual amounts, quantities too small to produce overt psychedelic effects, but purported to enhance mood, creativity, and focus. Typical microdoses range from 1/10 to 1/5 of a recreational dose. Users follow schedules, consuming small amounts every few days while going about normal activities. The practice is popular in professional environments where cognitive enhancement is valued, though rigorous scientific evidence for benefits remains limited. Purity and adulteration present different challenges than with synthetic drugs. Mushrooms are biological material, not chemical powders easily cut with inert substances. Contamination risks are more commonly biological: mold from improper storage, bacteria from moisture exposure. Dried mushrooms stored in sealed containers away from light remain stable for months or years. However, misidentification is a genuine danger. Some toxic mushroom species resemble psilocybin-containing varieties. Consuming the wrong species can cause liver failure and death. This risk is highest with wild harvested mushrooms foraged by inexperienced individuals. Cultivated mushrooms from known spore sources eliminate this risk entirely. Cultural contexts surrounding mushroom use vary enormously. In some circles, they are treated with reverence, consumed in nature, accompanied by intention setting and integration practices borrowed from psychedelic therapy models. In others, they are recreational substances consumed at parties, concerts, or festivals, valued for visual enhancement and euphoria. Socioeconomic factors shape access and use patterns. Cultivation requires time, space, and knowledge, resources more available to some populations than others. In decriminalized regions, Commercial availability expands access but also creates markets where profit motives may overshadow safety and education. Indigenous communities, particularly in Mexico, continue ceremonial use, though tourism and external attention complicate these practices. Some communities welcome outsiders, offering guided ceremonies for payment. Others restrict participation, protecting traditions from exploitation. The tension between cultural preservation and economic opportunity remains unresolved. Medical contexts represent the newest frontier. In jurisdictions permitting therapeutic use, psilocybin is administered in clinical settings under professional supervision. Patients receive pharmaceutical-grade psilocybin in measured doses, accompanied by psychological support before, during, and after sessions. This model emphasizes safety, integration, and therapeutic outcomes, contrasting sharply with recreational or ceremonial contexts. The mushroom in consumer hands is thus many things simultaneously: ancient sacrament, recreational drug, emerging medicine, cognitive enhancer, or simply a curiosity. Its meaning is not inherent but constructed through context, intention, and culture. The molecule remains constant. The experience it produces is anything but. As the mushroom is consumed, swallowed, and digested, the next transformation begins not chemical but neurological, occurring in the vast complexity of the human brain. The psilocin molecule, now circulating in the bloodstream, crosses the barrier between blood and brain tissue with ease. This barrier, which protects the brain from many substances, permits psilocin entry because of its structural similarity to serotonin, a neurotransmitter naturally present in the brain. Once inside neural tissue, psilocin begins binding to specific receptor sites, particularly those designated serotonin 2A receptors. These receptors are concentrated in areas of the brain responsible for mood regulation, sensory processing, and cognition. The prefrontal cortex, involved in executive function and self-reflection, contains high densities of these receptors. So do regions processing visual information. When psilocin binds, it triggers cascades of neural activity, amplifying and altering signaling patterns throughout interconnected brain networks. Effects typically begin within 20 to 40 minutes of ingestion, though onset varies with individual metabolism, stomach contents, and dose. The first sensations are often physical: a tingling in the extremities, a sense of energy or lightness, sometimes nausea as the body responds to chitin and other compounds in mushroom tissue. Pupils dilate, a response to serotonin receptor activation. Heart rate may increase slightly. Body temperature may rise. Then perceptual changes emerge. Colors become more vivid, saturated, luminous. Patterns appear in textures: wood grain, carpet fibers, clouds that seem to breathe, ripple, or shift. Geometric forms may overlay vision, particularly with eyes closed. These are not hallucinations in the sense of seeing objects that are not present, but rather distortions and enhancements of existing sensory input. Time perception alters profoundly. Minutes stretch, feeling like hours. Sequences of thought that would normally progress linearly loop back on themselves. The sense of time as forward-moving and measurable dissolves. Some describe this as experiencing the eternal present, where past and future collapse into a continuous now. Emotional states intensify and shift rapidly. Euphoria, wonder, and connection are common, described by users as among the most meaningful experiences of their lives. But fear, confusion, and paranoia can also arise, particularly in unsupportive settings or at higher doses. The emotional valence depends heavily on context, expectation, and individual psychology. At higher doses, the sense of self begins to fragment. The boundary between self and environment blurs. Some users report experiencing ego dissolution, a temporary loss of the sense of being a distinct individual. This can be ecstatic, terrifying, or both. Descriptions often invoke mystical language, unity with the universe, contact with the divine, encounters with ineffable dimensions of reality. What is happening neurologically during these experiences? Brain imaging studies using functional magnetic resonance technology show decreased activity in the default mode network, a set of brain regions active during self-referential thought and mind-wandering. This network is associated with the sense of self, with rumination, and with the narratives we construct about our identity. Psilocybin disrupts this network, reducing communication between its component regions. Simultaneously, it increases connectivity between brain regions that normally communicate less directly. The brain becomes more globally interconnected, more entropic, less constrained by its usual hierarchical organization. This increased randomness and flexibility may underlie the novel thoughts, insights, and perceptual experiences characteristic of the psychedelic state. The visual system, too, operates differently. The brain normally filters and interprets sensory data according to predictive models, suppressing irrelevant information and highlighting expected patterns. Psilocybin appears to reduce this filtering, allowing raw sensory data to flood consciousness with less top-down constraint. The result is heightened perception, pattern recognition in noise, and visual distortions. Physiologically, the cardiovascular system responds. Blood pressure may rise modestly, heart rate increases. For healthy individuals, these changes are generally within safe limits. For those with cardiovascular conditions, the stress could pose risks. Nausea and vomiting occur in some users, likely due to serotonin receptors in the gut. This effect diminishes after the first hour and is less common with extracted psilocybin than whole mushrooms. Motor coordination can be impaired. Fine movements become difficult. Some users feel physically heavy or clumsy, combined with perceptual distortions. This makes activities requiring coordination, like driving, extremely dangerous. Most users prefer to remain stationary, lying down or sitting, allowing the experience to unfold without physical demands. Duration is dose-dependent, but typically ranges from 4 to 6 hours. Effects peak between 2 and 3 hours after ingestion, then gradually diminish. The return to baseline is usually gentle, marked by a sense of reintegration and often profound tiredness. Sleep following the experience is deep, and users often wake feeling emotionally reset. The subjective intensity of these effects varies enormously between individuals and across experiences. Genetics influence receptor density and enzyme activity. Psychological factors like mood, expectation, and environment shape the experience profoundly. Two people consuming identical doses may have entirely different experiences. The same person may have different experiences from the same dose at different times. This variability underscores an important point. Psilocybin is not producing an effect imposed upon the brain from outside. It is modulating existing neural systems, amplifying and reorganizing patterns already present. The experience emerges from the interaction between molecule and mind, shaped by biology, psychology, and context. As the acute effects subside, the journey is not over. The next chapter concerns what remains when the molecule clears the system: memory, insight, change, and sometimes harm. When the psilocybin molecule is metabolized and excreted, usually within 24 hours, its direct action on the brain ceases. But the experience it facilitated leaves traces: memories, emotions, insights, and sometimes psychological wounds. Understanding long-term impact requires distinguishing between pharmacological effects and psychological consequences, between the molecule's actions and the human response. From a toxicological standpoint, psilocybin is remarkably safe. The lethal dose is extraordinarily high, thousands of times greater than a typical recreational dose. There are no documented cases of fatal overdose from psilocybin alone in humans. The molecule does not damage organs, does not cause neurotoxicity, and does not produce physical dependence. Users do not experience withdrawal symptoms when they stop consuming mushrooms. This safety profile distinguishes psilocybin from many substances, legal and illegal. Alcohol, in contrast, damages the liver, causes physical dependence, and kills tens of thousands annually through overdose and related causes. Opioids create profound physical dependence and kill through respiratory depression. Stimulants stress the cardiovascular system and can cause stroke or heart attack. Psilocybin lacks these mechanisms of direct physiological harm. Psychological risk, however, is real. The experience can be destabilizing, overwhelming, traumatic. Difficult experiences, sometimes called bad trips, involve intense fear, paranoia, confusion, or confrontation with disturbing thoughts and emotions. In unsupportive settings or without preparation, these experiences can be genuinely harmful, leaving lasting psychological distress. People with personal or family histories of psychotic disorders face particular risk. Psilocybin can precipitate psychotic episodes in vulnerable individuals, triggering hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized thinking that persist beyond the acute experience. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other conditions characterized by breaks from consensus reality represent contraindications for psilocybin use. However, for most users, negative psychological effects are temporary. Even difficult experiences often resolve within days or weeks, sometimes leading to valuable insights or personal growth. The adage that there are no bad trips, only difficult ones, captures a therapeutic perspective. Challenging experiences can be meaningful if properly integrated. Integration refers to the process of making sense of the experience, incorporating insights into daily life, and addressing emotions or memories that surfaced. Therapeutic models emphasize integration through discussion, reflection, and support. Without integration, profound experiences may remain psychologically unresolved, leaving confusion or distress. Addiction, in the traditional sense, does not occur with psilocybin. The molecule does not activate reward pathways in ways that drive compulsive use. Tolerance develops rapidly. Using psilocybin multiple days in succession produces diminishing effects, discouraging frequent use. Most users space experiences weeks or months apart. The intensity and duration of effects create natural barriers to abuse. Nonetheless, psychological patterns around use can be problematic. Some individuals use psychedelics escapistically, avoiding rather than addressing life challenges. Others chase peak experiences, seeking mystical states while neglecting practical responsibilities. These patterns, though not addiction in a clinical sense, can be maladaptive. Long-term positive effects, documented in both anecdotal reports and clinical research, include sustained improvements in mood, reductions in anxiety and depression, increased openness and creativity, and shifts in values and priorities. Some users report that a single profound experience changed their perspective on life, death, nature, or relationships in lasting ways. Clinical trials have demonstrated that psilocybin-assisted therapy can produce rapid and durable reductions in depression symptoms, sometimes after just 1 or 2 sessions. Patients with treatment-resistant depression, who failed to respond to conventional medications, show significant improvement. Similar benefits appear in studies of addiction, where psilocybin sessions help individuals quit smoking or reduce alcohol consumption. The mechanisms underlying these lasting changes are not fully understood. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and form new connections, likely plays a role. Psilocybin promotes neurogenesis and synaptogenesis in animal models, encouraging growth of new neurons and connections. Whether similar processes occur in humans remains under investigation. Psychologically, the experience may function as a catalyst, allowing individuals to see themselves, their habits, and their beliefs from new perspectives. This shift can disrupt entrenched patterns of thought and behavior, creating opportunities for change. When combined with therapeutic support, this catalyst effect can be harnessed for healing. Comparing psilocybin to other psychoactive substances highlights its unique profile. Unlike stimulants, it does not create cardiovascular strain or dopamine-driven compulsion. Unlike opioids, it does not suppress respiration or cause physical dependence. Unlike alcohol, it does not damage organs or impair judgment in ways leading to accidents and violence. Unlike cannabis, it does not produce cognitive impairment suitable for daily use, yet it is not harmless. Psychological vulnerability, setting, dose, and individual response all mediate outcomes. Harm reduction approaches emphasize education, testing for purity, using trusted guides or sitters, choosing safe environments, and screening for contraindications. Communities that follow these principles report lower rates of adverse outcomes. The paradox of psilocybin is this: pharmacologically safe, psychologically powerful, it rarely harms the body but can profoundly affect the mind. Used carelessly, it can traumatize. Used thoughtfully, it can heal. The molecule itself is neutral. The human context determines the outcome. This brings the narrative to its final chapter, the intersection of molecule and meaning, the broader human story that contains all the previous chapters. The mushroom, when examined closely, is a convergence point. Biology, chemistry, history, politics, spirituality, and economics meet in this organism and the molecule it produces. To understand psilocybin fully is to understand how humans relate to nature, consciousness, prohibition, and healing. The story begins in evolutionary time, with fungi developing chemical defenses, and continues through millennia of indigenous ceremonial use. This long relationship suggests something profound. Humans and psilocybin mushrooms co-evolved, not in the biological sense, but culturally. Societies that encountered these mushrooms integrated them into cosmology and healing. The experiences they produced shaped art, ritual, and understanding of the sacred. Then came disruption. Colonial forces suppressed indigenous practices, viewing them as threats to Christian dominance. Centuries of ceremonial knowledge went underground, preserved by communities who resisted erasure. This suppression was not unique to mushrooms, but part of broader colonial violence against indigenous cultures. The 20th century rediscovery by Western scientists recapitulated colonial dynamics. Outsiders arrived in indigenous lands, extracted knowledge, published it globally, and profited academically, culturally, financially, while communities bore the burdens of disruption. This pattern repeats across psychedelic history. Ayahuasca, peyote, iboga. Sacred plants commodified, traditions appropriated, profits flowing away from source communities. Yet the mushroom also became a tool of resistance. Counterculture movements embraced psychedelics as means of consciousness expansion, social critique, and personal liberation. The state's response, prohibition, criminalization, propaganda, revealed anxieties about control and consciousness. To alter one's mind without state approval became a political act. Prohibition failed, as it often does. The mushroom's biology made enforcement nearly impossible. Unlike substances requiring international supply chains, mushrooms could grow anywhere. The organism itself was the rebellion, fruiting in closets and basements, beyond the reach of law. Decades of prohibition had consequences. Research halted. Potential medical applications remained unexplored. Millions encountered mushrooms without education, guidance, or harm reduction resources. Prohibition created exactly the conditions it claimed to prevent: risky, unregulated use in unsupported contexts. Now, a new chapter unfolds. Clinical research demonstrates therapeutic potential too significant to ignore. Patients with depression, anxiety, addiction, and trauma find relief where conventional treatments failed. The evidence forces reconsideration of prohibition's logic. If a substance this safe and potentially beneficial remains illegal, what does that reveal about drug policy? Decriminalization and medical legalization movements gain momentum, driven by patients, advocates, and researchers. Oregon, Colorado, and other jurisdictions create legal frameworks for supervised use. Canada and Australia permit psilocybin therapy for specific conditions. The global trend, though uneven, moves toward re-legalization. This shift creates new tensions. Pharmaceutical companies seek to patent formulations, delivery methods, and protocols. Venture capital funds, startups aiming to commercialize psychedelic therapy. Indigenous advocates demand recognition, compensation, and protection of traditional knowledge. The tension between access, profit, and cultural respect is unresolved. Medical models risk replicating colonial patterns in new forms, extracting the molecule from cultural context, sterilizing it into pharmaceutical product, monetizing therapy beyond reach of those who need it most. These are dangers inherent in medicalization. Yet medical frameworks also provide safety, research, and legitimacy that underground markets cannot. Ecological considerations emerge as well. If demand for mushrooms increases dramatically, will wild populations be overharvested? Cultivation offers sustainability, but monoculture production for profit differs from small-scale community cultivation. The mycelial networks that produce mushrooms also support forest ecosystems, cycling nutrients and supporting plant life. Disrupting these networks for commercial harvest could harm biodiversity. Therapeutic research continues, revealing complexities. Not all patients respond. Some experience minimal benefits. Others have difficult sessions requiring extensive support. Therapy protocols matter enormously. Setting, preparation, integration, therapeutic relationship all shape outcomes. The mushroom alone is not medicine. The experience, held within supportive human context, becomes medicine. Simultaneously, recreational use persists and expands. Decriminalization reduces legal risks. Cultivation knowledge spreads through online communities. Mushrooms reach populations previously lacking access. This democratization has benefits: autonomy, exploration, personal growth, and risks: unsafe use, psychological harm, exploitative markets. The microdosing phenomenon represents another dimension. Professionals seeking competitive advantage, creatives pursuing inspiration, and individuals managing depression embrace subperceptual doses. Whether this practice delivers promised benefits remains scientifically uncertain, but it reflects broader cultural patterns. Optimization, enhancement, the quest for productivity and well-being through chemical means. Indigenous perspectives remain marginalized in these conversations. The Mazatec curandera, whose ceremony sparked Western interest, denounced the exploitation that followed. Her voice, and others like hers, remind that the mushroom is not simply a molecule but part of living traditions with ethical claims to respect and protection. Families and communities bear the complex impacts. Some find healing, depression lifting, relationships improving, trauma integrating. Others experience harm, psychotic breaks, destabilization, risky behavior. The mushroom does not choose outcomes. Human contexts determine whether the molecule facilitates healing or harm. The future remains uncertain. Will medicalization improve access or create new barriers? Will decriminalization reduce harm or increase risky use? Will indigenous communities gain recognition and compensation or suffer continued appropriation? Will ecological sustainability be prioritized or sacrificed to profit? The mushroom, throughout all this, continues fruiting. Rain falls, mycelium spreads, caps emerge from forest floors and pastures and cultivation chambers. The molecule exists whether humans use it or not. Psilocybin serves evolutionary purposes beyond human consciousness, playing roles in fungal ecology we barely understand. Yet human consciousness remains central to this story. The molecule's ability to dissolve ego boundaries, reveal interconnection, and facilitate profound experiences of meaning speaks to something essential in human nature: the drive to transcend ordinary awareness, to encounter mystery, to explore the depths of mind. This drive is ancient, universal, and risky. Every culture has sought altered states through fasting, meditation, dance, rhythm, and entheogens. The means vary, but the impulse persists. Psilocybin is one path among many, neither better nor worse, but distinct in its accessibility and effects. The journey that began in mycelial networks beneath soil completes itself in human consciousness, then returns to Earth as insight, memory, change. The molecule cycles through bodies and ecosystems, through history and culture, through prohibition and resurgence. Each fruiting connects past and future, organism and mind, nature and human story. The mushroom teaches, if anything, interconnection. Fungal networks connect trees, cycling nutrients, communicating through chemical signals. The experience of psilocybin often reveals similar patterns in human life: the illusion of separation, the reality of interdependence, the mycelial web of relationships constituting self and world. This is the larger human story, not simply the pharmacology or history of a molecule, but the ongoing negotiation between humans and non-human nature, between consciousness and chemistry, between control and surrender. The mushroom, small and humble, sits at the center of these conversations, reminding us that some of the most profound questions remain unanswered. Some of the deepest mysteries reside not in distant stars, but beneath our feet, in the dark soil where life breaks down and begins again.